Due to their wide range of abilities, sports sedans are quickly becoming my favorite class of car. One that recently stood out to me was the Chevrolet SS, with its thundering V8, classic rear drive dynamics, and super capable Magneride suspension. From the outside, it might be confused for a rental car, but the way it drives, a bit like a 5-seater Corvette, makes it all worth it. On the other hand, Lexus has long been known for selling dependable, comfortable, and well-built vehicles for grandmas. I would say that's still somewhat true today, but part of Lexus's brand image diverged in 2007 when the high-performance F lineup was kicked off with the IS F. Its formula is shared with the Chevy: naturally aspirated V8, rear-wheel drive, and sport-tuned suspension and brakes. Today, clean examples can be found for $30,000 to $40,000, meaning it undercuts the newer but similar on paper Chevy SS by $5,000 to $10,000. But is it a $5,000 to $10,000 lesser driving experience?
So what's there to be said about the Chevy SS that I haven't already said in the previous video? Well, to be honest, not a whole lot. This is a pretty straightforward car, and now that I'm driving it for the second time, I can basically sum it up as this. It is a comfortable family sedan first, and a tire shredding sports sedan second. That becomes immediately evident when you start pushing it in the corners on a twisty road, because it feels like a very soft around the edges car. It's softly sprung, and the car is very heavy. This is a 4,000-pound sedan, same size roughly as a BMW 5 Series from the era. Now this particular model is a 2016, and it's equipped with the 6-speed automatic transmission. Of course, this has the 6.2-liter LS3 V8, making 415 horsepower and 415 foot-pounds of torque. It makes all the right sounds. The exhaust, I would say, is moderately quiet actually, but there's so much intake sound from inside the cabin from this V8. Classic LS growl. Redline's only around $6,000, and there's really not a whole lot of reason to take it out there because there's so much torque in the low end and the mid-range. So there are three things about this car that I mentioned in my first video that are worth repeating. First of all, this LS3 engine, as I said, is a powerhouse. It's not incredibly powerful given the weight of the car. 415 horsepower, 4,000 pounds. That's a little bit less than 10 pounds per horsepower, which is a healthy amount, but it's not going to break your neck in a straight line. That said, the torque is really the defining characteristic of the LS3. It just makes so much torque everywhere. So you have no problem passing people on the freeway. And even in the canyons here, you can keep the engine around 3,000 RPM and it feels more than quick enough. Now, the second thing about this car that I want to point out is that the Magneride suspension is really, really good. This same system was used with a lot of success and great reviews in the Camaro SS, and for good reason. This suspension is adjustable via the dial right here in the center console. We currently have it in the performance mode that firms up the dampening just enough. I think in the tour mode and even the sport mode, it's a little bit too soft. Great for daily driving, but not so much out here where you want tighter body control. And the third thing I want to mention about the SS, this particular one at least, is that this 6-speed automatic transmission is terrible. It's fine for daily driving, it's smooth, it's comfortable, but out here, the downshifts are about what you'd expect for a torque converter auto, but these upshifts are just, so slow. All right, watch this. I'm in third gear here, floor it, 4,000 RPMs, pull the paddle, and almost 2 seconds later, it finally decides to shift. The upshifts in this car are one of the slowest I've felt in any performance car ever. So the transmission really feels like an afterthought in this car. This car was designed to have a 6-speed manual, and unfortunately, they didn't bring a whole lot of those to the United States. And so if you do a quick search on AutoTrader, Craigslist, Cars.com, you won't find a whole lot of manually equipped Chevy SS's. And if you do, they command quite a premium over the automatic counterpart. And with the suspension in the performance mode, it really feels very well damped. It's not easily upset by these bumps here at all. Feels like a 4,000 pound car, but at the same time, the damping helps hide some of that weight when you're attacking the corners. And just like that, we switched the transmission back into the automatic shifting mode, and we'll flip this dial back over to Sport and then over to Tour. Steering gets light, the suspension gets nice and soft, and the car is perfectly comfortable as a daily. So to sum it up, my one big gripe with this car is not the weight, it's not the engine, it's the transmission. It just really lets down what is otherwise a really enjoyable sports sedan driving experience. And so I really want to find out if the Lexus IS F, which is a car that's very similar on paper to the Chevy SS, albeit, you know, smaller dimensions, a couple 100 pounds lighter. I'm curious to see if that car rights some of the wrongs of the SS. I know the ISF is an older car than this. The one that we're about to drive is a 2008, but it shares a lot of the same defining characteristics, namely a big displacement V8, rear-wheel drive, almost 2 tons of curb weight, and a torque converter automatic transmission. So this 2008 Lexus IS F might also be a nearly 2-ton family sedan, rear-wheel drive, over 400 horsepower V8 with an automatic transmission, similar to the SS, but that's about where the similarities end. Right away, I can tell that this is an altogether much more focused driver's car than the SS. The ISF was originally a skunkworks project by Lexus that was released for the 2008 model year, and it is the very first F moniker vehicle from the manufacturer. Now, this particular car, owned by a gentleman named Anthony, has done over 163,000 miles. He just picked it up not long ago for less than 15 grand. But a mint condition ISF, especially a 2011 plus facelifted model, will run you anywhere from 30 to 40 grand, which brings it pretty close to the Chevy SS. This car is powered by a 5-liter naturally aspirated V8, making 416 horsepower, so 1 more horsepower than the SS, and around 370 plus foot-pounds of torque. So it's down about 10% in torque to the SS, but this car is also a couple of 100 pounds lighter. And right away, driving this car, I can immediately tell it's a more driver-focused experience. The steering is much tighter, much more direct. The front end of the car just responds so much better than the SS's. And the suspension, while it is a little bit firm for daily driving, as it doesn't have adaptive dampers, it's just a single setting, out here in the canyons, it really does feel a lot better controlled through these twisties. So flip it over to sport mode here with the transmission in manual shift mode, and let's start pushing it a little bit. Yeah, this front end just bites in a way the SS's doesn't even come close. Now, this 8-speed automatic transmission was one of the very first 8-speed autos in any car, so the gear ratios as a result are very short, closely spaced. You keep this engine in the power band at all times very easily. And I gotta say, this transmission shifts so much quicker and responds so much better than the 6-speed in the Chevy. Just listen to this engine, 5-liter V8, making all the right sounds, rev match downshifts, plenty of mid-range torque, not quite as torquey as the SS, but at least this engine rewards you for winding it out. And wow, the brake pedal, these Brembo calipers, 6-piston front, 4-piston rear, really stop the car well. Oh man, this is good. This is really good. This doesn't feel like a nearly 2-ton sedan. It hides the weight actually a lot better than the SS does. You can really dive into corners with so much confidence. The front end just responds. You know, it will try to step out on you a little bit, but it is a very controllable driving experience. The steering, even though it's electrically assisted just like the SS, so much tighter, so much more feedback. And this is just on a completely different level in terms of driving dynamics, it must be said. Car has an abundance of mid-corner grip, and the amount of body roll is just so well controlled Whereas the SS would be bobbing back and forth in this corner here. This car is just planted and solid. This car just wants to egg you on in a way the SS just doesn't. I thought the SS was really good given its stats on paper, but this is on a different level. This is on a completely different level. This is much more of a fingertips driving experience. You can really just weave it through corners and pick your line and just attack. In the SS, you really have to be patient and really manage the weight transfer. It's a 2-ton sedan. But then again, so is this one. I mean, this one's a couple 100 pounds lighter, but not by much. But in the corners, this feels like a completely different class of car altogether. Now, out here on the open road, when you're not trying to drive it aggressively, flip it over into the automatic transmission mode. The transmission, 8-speed, really close gear ratios, and what that means is that it'll keep the RPM really, really low when you're just cruising. We're at like 1200 RPM right now. The transmission responds very well even in the automatic mode when you want it to downshift. This really is a world-class sports sedan driving experience, and that's saying something considering I've been driving a lot of sports sedans lately. The F80 M3 Competition, Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio, the B7 RS4, the Chevy SS. This hangs with the best of them, it must be said. And I think if there's only one gripe I had with it is I wish that Lexus actually put adaptive dampers in this car with a softer setting for daily driving. I think the only gripe is that it is a little bit firm for daily driving, but everything else about the car really well balanced, really well refined, and it's a top-notch driving experience, especially considering it's a 3,800 pound car with an 8-speed torque converter auto. I would say this transmission it's not as quick, but it's also not too far off from a modern ZF 8-speed like you'd get in the new GR Supra. So overall, as a driving experience, this gets very close to top marks for me as a sports sedan, especially one that came out in the same time frame as the E92 M3. This is a really, really good alternative to the E92 M3 or E90 M3 sedan. And Anthony mentioned that, you know, this car is actually not super high mileage given what it is, 163,000 miles. There have been plenty of examples, I'm told, that have breached 200,000 miles. And overall, there's no catastrophic known problems with the car. There are a few issues, like he mentioned that the valley pan can leak coolant, but it's not a catastrophic issue and it's easy to spot. And compared to the German competitors of the time, the C63 AMG and the E92 M3, this car is definitely going to be a lot more reliable. I mean, how many E92s or 63s do you see out there with 163,000 miles and still driving this well? It really, really is an impressive machine. And honestly, for the price, considering this undercuts the SS on average, this would be my choice for a driver-focused sports sedan, hands down.
While the Chevy SS and Lexus IS F are both very well-rounded cars, neither is perfect as a do-it-all sports sedan. The SS feels a bit too soft around the edges with its numb steering and lazy transmission. The ISF, on the other hand, steers, handles, and changes gear much more sharply, but its firm suspension might be a bother in day-to-day driving. Still, the Lexus's ride quality is something I'd be willing to put up with given how much more competently it handles a twisty road. In other words, if you want your sports sedan to actually feel sporty, the ISF is the clear winner. Here's hoping the upcoming Lexus IS 500 retains the ISF's reliability and improves upon its shortcomings without sacrificing any of its character.